Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Please subscribe my channel. Monday sunlight poured through the long windows of the Hawthorne Club's private dining room and flashed across the polished mahogany table, turning the glossy photographs in front of me into little knives of light, and across from me my daughter-in-law, Lila Bennett Mercer, held one manicured hand flat over them as if she were pinning me to the wood. "Say it again," she snapped, leaning forward in her cream wool blazer. "Tell everyone you didn't know where your own car was." My son Daniel sat to her right with his jaw locked so tightly I could see the hinge move under his skin. Celeste Bennett, Lila's mother, smoothed the cloth napkin in her lap without looking at me, folding and refolding the same corner until her knuckles went pale. Gordon Bennett drummed two thick fingers beside his water glass and stared with the smug patience of a man who believed the room had already decided in his favor. Near the doorway, Richard Connolly from our family office stood with both hands clasped in front of him, eyes lowered to the carpet, the posture of someone who had agreed to witness something ugly and regretted it the moment it began. Lila pushed a printed screenshot toward me. "You texted me that I could take the Mercedes on Saturday. Then you embarrassed my parents by telling the gatehouse attendant it was stolen. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was? My name is Evelyn Mercer. I'm 62. And this is the story of how I turned one stolen weekend, and the family trap built around it, into the cleanest kind of justice." The room smelled faintly of coffee, lemon polish, and the lilies arranged in a low crystal vase at the center of the table. I noticed details like that when other people tried to force panic on me. Panic narrows the mind. Detail sharpens it. Daniel finally looked up. He did not look angry. That would have been easier. He looked practiced. "Mom," he said, voice low, palms opened in front of him on the table. "Nobody's trying to upset you. We're worried. This isn't the first time you've forgotten something lately." There it was. Not the car. Not the disrespect. The car had only been the bait. The real target was my credibility. I picked up the screenshot with 2 fingers and held it at a distance, as if I were checking the print quality. Lila's lipstick was a careful matte rose. Her posture was perfect. Her ankle crossed over her calf, under the chair with theatrical poise. She had dressed for this the way some women dressed for engagement photos. Celeste drew a slow breath and finally added her part. "Evelyn, dear, these things happen. At our age, stress can make memory slippery. Nobody is blaming you. At our age." That phrase settled over the table with all the false softness it was meant to carry. She was 59. I was 62. 3 years. And suddenly I was a cautionary tale. Gordon cleared his throat. Daniel mentioned there were a couple of other incidents. The checkbook, the forgotten lunch at the club, the mix-up with the gardener. "That's enough," Daniel said, but he said it lightly, almost as if he knew Gordon had spoken exactly on cue. Lila tilted her head. "No, let's be honest. We all care about Evelyn. That's why Richard is here. If there needs to be a temporary adjustment to account access or vehicle use, we can handle it privately, quietly, before this becomes something worse." Richard swallowed and adjusted his cuff. That tiny movement told me more than his silence did. He had been told this was an intervention, a financial precaution, a son helping his mother. He had not been told he was sitting in the middle of a performance. I set the screenshot down. "My car," I said evenly, "is a graphite 2022 Mercedes S580 with parchment leather seats, walnut trim, and a scratch on the rear console from Daniel's golf clubs last September. I last fueled it Friday at 4:12 p.m. at the Shell on Green Bay Road. On Saturday at 10:58 a.m., your daughter used a copied key to remove it from my garage." Lila let out one sharp laugh. "Copied key? Evelyn, please." Daniel's eyes shifted toward her for a fraction of a second. That was the first crack. He had hoped I would sound confused. Instead, I sounded precise. I folded my hands over one another. "You took my car to Lake Shore Jewelers in Wilmette, then to Stonegate Residences in Winnetka, then to Halpern Elder Law in the city, then to Miramar for dinner with your parents. Your father drove it for 18 minutes between Winnetka and the expressway and clipped my right rear wheel against a curb at 3:41 p.m. No one spoke. Outside the private room, somewhere down the corridor, a woman's heels struck the floor like a metronome. Inside, the silence that followed was absolute. Lila blinked first. "You're insane." "Careful," I said. Daniel leaned forward. Mom, where is this coming from? I looked at him. Really looked at him. The blue tie. The shallow line between his brows that deepened when he was cornered. The way he always pressed his thumbnail against the side of his index finger when he was lying and trying to appear calm. He was doing it now, under the table where he thought I couldn't see. It's coming, I said. From the fact that you chose Monday for this. Celeste drew back in her chair. Gordon's fingers stopped drumming. Lila recovered first. She always recovered first in rooms built on surface. Evelyn, you're proving my point. You're rattling off random places because Teresa probably told you where we went. Teresa didn't need to. Lila's expression shifted. A very small shift. But I had spent 10 years watching her arrange herself in every possible social climate. I knew the difference between offense and calculation. She was calculating. Daniel tried again, gentler now. Mom, if there was a misunderstanding about the car, we'll sort that out. But you can't accuse Lila of theft after you texted her permission. I turned the paperback toward him and tapped the top right corner with one nail. Daniel, you know I keep my phone on 24-hour time. That screenshot shows 10:14 a.m. Richard looked up. Lila's spine stiffened. I continued before anyone could rush over it. My phone displays 10:14 only if someone else creates the image. My messages appear 10:14 in the morning or 22:14 at night. Always have. Celeste's mouth parted. Gordon muttered, Jesus Christ. Lila's voice rose. That means nothing. People change settings. Not without changing every screenshot in the last 7 years. I reached for my water, took one slow sip, and set the glass down exactly where it had been. You should have asked before you took the car. That would have been rude enough. Instead, you turned it into a competency trap. Daniel straightened. Nobody is trapping you. Then why was Richard invited before I was? He looked at Richard. Richard looked at the table. I could feel the room trying to rebalance itself around me and failing. Lila sat back and crossed her arms. Fine. Let's say we borrowed the car without asking. You want an apology? Here. I'm sorry, but the reason this got out of hand is because you overreacted. You told the gatehouse attendant the vehicle was missing. I told the gatehouse attendant, I said, that if my vehicle left the property again without my direct authorization, I wanted the plate logged. Daniel's face strained slightly. He hadn't known that detail. Good. Lila tried to smile, but it landed wrong. You really want to do this in front of everyone? No, I said. You did. Gordon pushed back from the table, hard enough for the chair legs to bite the carpet. This is ridiculous. If you got some paranoid theory, say it. Otherwise, we're done. I looked at him, then at Celeste, then back to Lila. Your husband asked our family office for summaries of my trust distributions 3 weeks ago. You asked your assistant to schedule a consultation with an elder law attorney last Thursday. Your parents toured Stonegate on Saturday and were introduced as possibly moving closer to family support. Would you like me to continue? Celeste made a sound in the back of her throat. Daniel went still. Lila's hand, resting near her napkin, curled inward until the tendons showed. That was when I knew beyond any doubt that they had not expected me to know the shape of the whole plan. They had expected noise, hurt, tears maybe. They had expected me to argue the theft, not expose the architecture around it. Daniel tried to stand on authority. He had inherited that instinct from his father, and when it worked, he mistook it for integrity. Mom, he said sharply, stop. You're making wild accusations. No. I adjusted the sleeve of my navy silk blouse and sat a little straighter. I'm making a schedule. At 2 o'clock this afternoon, we're all meeting at Price, Adler and Keene in Chicago. If you prefer to bring separate counsel, you should begin making calls now. Lila stared at me. Excuse me. I said. I replied quietly, you should begin making calls now. For the first time since I entered the room, nobody tried to interrupt me. I opened my handbag, removed my keys, and placed them beside my water glass. No one is taking my accounts, I said. No one is taking my house. And no one is ever touching my car again. Daniel's voice cracked on the first word. You hired a lawyer over a family misunderstanding. I held his gaze. No, Daniel. Over a family conspiracy. Then I rose, smoothed the front of my skirt, and walked out of the room while they were still deciding whether to follow me. The first person I called on Saturday was not the police. It was Joanna Price. Joanna had the kind of voice that made people lower theirs without realizing it. We met 19 years earlier when my husband Thomas and I were renegotiating a commercial lease portfolio after a merger. She was younger then, not yet named partner, with dark hair pinned back so tightly it made her look almost severe. Men underestimated her until the first 10 minutes of the meeting were over. Then they remembered every word she said for years. When I called that Saturday at 11:23 a.m., I was in my breakfast room with the French doors open to the terrace, sunlight on the limestone floor, Teresa hovering near the sideboard pretending not to listen. "Evelyn," Joanna said, "this better be good. I am about to sit through my niece's cello recital." My daughter-in-law copied my car key and took my Mercedes to an elder law office with my son and her parents. There was a pause. Then, "Send me everything you know in order." So I did, not dramatically, not breathlessly. I read from my notes. Garage alert at 10:58 a.m. Vehicle route to Wilmette, Winnetka, Chicago. Unknown reason for elder law office visit. Suspicious timing in relation to Daniel's recent requests for trust information. Lila's earlier comments about simplifying my living situation. The way she'd asked 2 weeks ago whether I still kept the guest house deed in my main file cabinet. The questions had stacked slowly over months, small enough to seem rude rather than dangerous. Saturday gave them shape. By noon, Joanna had done 3 things. She instructed me not to contact Daniel or Lila. She connected me with Martin Vale, a former financial crimes investigator who now worked private matters with the patients of a watchmaker. And she told me, if this is what I think it is, don't stop them. Let them finish the weekend. That advice would have frightened a younger version of me. At 40, I might have rushed to the city, confronted them at the attorney's office, demanded my key, called my son until he answered. At 50, I might have mistaken immediate action for strong action. But by 62, widowhood had taught me something useful about power. The first feeling is rarely the best decision. So I did nothing visible. I let them keep the car until Saturday night. I let them believe I'd noticed only the insult. I let Daniel leave 2 cheerful voicemails asking whether we were still on for brunch Monday, as if he weren't spending that very afternoon in the back seat of my car while his wife built a case around me. And while they played house in my leather interior, I built my own file. The Mercedes helped. Thomas had insisted on every possible security feature because that was the sort of man he was. He bought beautiful things, but he expected them to report back. The car had full route history, remote access logs, cabin camera snapshots triggered by certain events, and cloud storage connected to my account. On Sunday morning, Martin sent one secure folder with 12 labeled subfolders and a note that read, "Start with Saturday_interior_1529. I opened it at my kitchen counter with a cup of black coffee cooling by my hand. The marble was cold under my wrist. Outside, the hydrangeas along the back path moved in a slow wind. Inside the video frame, Lila was in the front passenger seat, one heel tucked under her, speaking over her shoulder to her mother. "I'm telling you, once Daniel gets her to step back from the accounts, the house is the next conversation. The guest house is empty. There is no reason my parents should still be in that townhouse." Celeste's voice came from the back seat. "Do not say that so loudly. It's my husband's family," Lila said. "It's our future." Then Gordon laughed and said, "As long as she doesn't get dramatic." I watched it twice, not because I doubted what I heard, because I wanted to burn away every last instinct to minimize it. There is a particular kind of injury that arrives, not as shock but as arrangement. Every previous slight suddenly lines up. The borrowed comments, the 2 familiar questions about my passwords, Daniel casually asking whether I'd thought about a smaller place, Lila praising multi-generational living while staring at the guest house windows. It was all there now, each piece placed exactly where it had always been. Martin's second folder contained route logs, toll transponder records, parking receipts, and one useful photograph from the valet station at Miramar, where the attendant had leaned into the window while Gordon Bennett sat at the wheel of my car wearing Thomas's aviator sunglasses from the center console. That single image told a story no apology could fix. The third folder was better. At 2:04 p.m. Saturday, the Mercedes had been parked outside Halpern Elder Law on Wacker Drive. Martin's firm had already sent a runner to the building. By Sunday, we had confirmation from a receptionist who remembered Lila vividly because she had arrived 15 minutes late and spoke as if lateness were the office's fault. She had signed in as Lila Mercer. Daniel Mercer joined at 2:17. Celeste and Gordon Bennett waited in the lobby. The intake sheet requested information about recent cognitive shifts in widowed parent and options for temporary asset supervision. Temporary asset supervision. That phrase sat on the page like a stain. By Sunday afternoon, Joanna had added a fourth file to the collection, Daniel's request to Richard Connolly from 3 weeks earlier. Subject line, just organizing things for Mom. He had asked for a summary of trustee access, distribution timing, and property title structure in case we need to streamline paperwork after the summer. Richard, to his credit, had provided only general information and copied no one. But the inquiry was there, and the date mattered. Premeditation always lives in dates. At 5 o'clock Sunday evening, I sat in the library with the lights low and the original blueprints of our Lake Forest house spread across the desk, because I liked the discipline of looking at something exact. Walnut shelves, green-shaded lamp, the smell of paper and old binding glue. Martin called and said he had one more item. Do you know a woman named Sofia Delgado? I know Lila mentions her when she wants to sound important. She's Lila's executive assistant. I gather that much. Martin was quiet for a beat. She wants to talk to Joanna. Off the clock. That got my attention. About what? According to her, Ms. Mercer asked her to create a private chronology titled Memory Incidents, Evelyn, and compile it in a folder for Monday. I closed my eyes for 1 second. There it was. The bridge between insult and legal strategy. What kind of incidents? Missed lunch. Repeated story at Easter. Confusion over a contractor invoice. Forgot a checkbook. I opened my eyes again and stared at Thomas's old fountain pen lying parallel to the edge of the desk. I had not forgotten a checkbook. I had moved it to the downstairs office during tax season. The lunch at Easter had been postponed by rain. The repeated story had been told once to a cousin who had arrived late. A contractor invoice had been corrected because they billed the wrong property. Truth, in the hands of ambitious people, is often only a matter of sequencing. What does she want in exchange? I asked. Nothing yet. Joanna says her grandmother went through something similar with a nephew. She recognized the shape. I leaned back in my chair and let the implications settle over the room. I was no longer dealing with opportunism after the fact. I was dealing with a prepared narrative, a folder of curated incidents, a copied key, and a timed public confrontation meant to make me react emotionally in front of witnesses. They thought the car was leverage. It was evidence. By Monday morning, I had slept 6 hours, chosen navy over black, and arranged for Teresa to send the wheel repair estimate from North Shore Motors to Joanna before 10. I had also done one thing for myself. I took the Mercedes to the detailing bay at Mercer House at 7:15 a.m. and stood there while the technician vacuumed the rear floor mats and wiped fingerprints from the walnut console. Not because I cared about the fingerprints. Because I wanted the car restored before the people who dirted it lost access to me forever. When I reached the Hawthorne Club for brunch, they were already seated. Lila had chosen the far side of the table, where the light hit her face cleanly. Daniel had placed Richard beside him, so there would be an implied professional witness to my supposed instability. Celeste wore pearls. Gordon wore the expression of a man attending an inevitable transfer of authority. On the chair beside Lila was a pale leather folder. I would later learn it held the fabricated chronology Sophia had described. That was the thing about people who mistake themselves for the smartest in the room. They cannot resist bringing props. When I walked in, Lila stood immediately. "Evelyn," she said in that false bright hostess voice. "Thank you for coming. We thought it would be best to have a calm conversation." As if she'd invited me to tea. I took my seat. A server filled my coffee. Nobody touched the pastries. Lila opened the folder with deliberate care and slid out the screenshot, the incident list, and a typed page titled Suggested Immediate Supports. Vehicle Supervision. Account Co-signing. Medication Review. Home Staffing Increase. Recommendation for Voluntary Cognitive Assessment. Voluntary. I almost admired the language. Lila had chosen the far side of the table, where the light hit her face cleanly. Daniel had placed Richard beside him, so there would be an implied professional witness to my supposed instability. Celeste wore pearls. Gordon wore the expression of a man attending an inevitable transfer of authority. On the chair beside Lila was a pale leather folder. I would later learn it held the fabricated chronology Sophia had described. That was the thing about people who mistake themselves for the smartest in the room. They cannot resist bringing props. When I walked in, Lila stood immediately. "Evelyn," she said in that false bright hostess voice. "Thank you for coming. We thought it would be best to have a calm conversation." As if she'd invited me to tea. I took my seat. A server filled my coffee. Nobody touched the pastries. Lila opened the folder with deliberate care and slid out the screenshot, the incident list, and a typed page titled Suggested Immediate Supports. Vehicle Supervision. Account Co-signing. Medication Review. Home Staffing Increase. Recommendation for Voluntary Cognitive Assessment. Voluntary. I almost admire the language. Then came the speech about concern. About dignity. About not wanting to make this adversarial. About family needing to step in before outsiders did. Daniel added a sonorous little line about wanting to preserve my independence while ensuring safety. Gordon discussed best practices. Celeste said these things happen twice. Richard said nothing. And then Lila made her mistake. She placed her hand on mine. It was brief, light, almost tender to anyone not sitting in my skin. "We're trying to protect you," she said softly. I removed my hand and reached into my bag for my phone. Lila smiled tightly. "Please don't call someone. Just listen." "I am listening," I said, unlocking the screen. "Now you'll do the same." I turned the device toward Richard first, not them. That mattered. He was the neutral ground they had hoped to occupy. The first image was the garage log. Saturday, 10:58 a.m., side entry accessed with copied fob ID. The second was the route history. The third was the valet photo of Gordon behind my wheel. The fourth was a still from the interior camera, timestamped 15:29, showing Lila turning in her seat to say, very clearly, once Daniel gets her to step back from the accounts, the house is the next conversation. Richard inhaled through his nose and stepped back. Daniel's face went blank in that terrifying way some people go blank just before they lash out. "Where did you get that?" "From my car." Lila shot to her feet. "You recorded us. You used my vehicle while plotting to remove me from my own financial life." "This is illegal," Gordon barked. Joanna's voice, from the doorway behind me, cut through him cleanly. "No, Gordon. What's illegal is unauthorized use of property in furtherance of attempted elder exploitation." I didn't turn immediately. I let them hear her first. Then I looked back and saw her standing there in a charcoal suit, leather folio in one hand, martingale beside her with a slim black case. Joanna crossed the threshold with the composure of a surgeon entering an operating room. No rush, no flourish, just inevitability. Lila stared. "What is this?" "This," Joanna replied, taking the empty chair to my left, "is where your weekend starts becoming expensive." Daniel stood. "You can't just storm in here and accuse us of crimes." Joanna set her folio on the table and unclipped it. "Daniel, you requested trust access information on June 24th. Lila scheduled a consultation at Halpern Elder Law on July 10th. On Saturday, July 12th, the four of you used Evelyn's vehicle without permission to attend that consultation and tour Stonegate residences. Your father-in-law then drove the vehicle, causing documented wheel damage. Meanwhile, Miss Delgado was instructed to prepare a chronology of alleged cognitive decline for presentation this morning. This is not a misunderstanding. It is a sequence." Lila's face lost color, so quickly it looked as if someone had removed heat from the room. Celeste whispered, "Sophia." Gordon rounded on Daniel. "You told me the assistant handled scheduling, not paperwork." There it was. Fracture. Lila ignored him and fixed on me instead. "You went through my office." "No," I said. "You hired people who know the difference between concern and theft." Martin opened his case and laid 3 items on the table one by one. A wheel repair estimate, the copied key invoice from North Shore Motors dated 6 weeks earlier, and a printout of the fabricated screenshot metadata that showed the image had been created Sunday night from an edited export, not captured from a live message thread. Daniel stared at the paper. "This can't be right." Martin's expression did not change. "It is." Lila's voice thinned. "I made a mock-up because the original text thread got deleted." I looked at her for a moment. "Actually, you were committing fraud." The sentence landed harder than if I'd shouted. Daniel swayed back half a step and grabbed the chair before sitting. Gordon lowered himself more abruptly than I had ever seen him move. Celeste pressed 2 fingers to the pearl necklace at her throat. Richard finally spoke, and when he did, his banker's smoothness was gone. "Joanna, do you need a formal statement from me regarding Daniel's inquiries?" "Yes," Joanna said. Daniel turned to him. "Richard, for God's sake." Richard met his eyes. "You told me this was estate planning." "This is not estate planning." Lila's chest rose and fell rapidly. "Evelyn, listen to me. I was trying to help Daniel because you've been isolated since Tom died, and do not use my husband's name to steady yourself." She stopped. I slid my phone across the table to her and played the interior clip. Her own face stared back at her in silence before the audio started. Once Daniel gets her to step back from the accounts, the house is the next conversation. Then Celeste, "Do not say that so loudly." Then Gordon's laugh. I stopped the clip before it finished. The silence after that was dense and physical. Nobody in that room could pretend anymore that this was about care. Care does not need copied keys, mock-up texts, and Monday witnesses. Joanna closed her folio. "At 2:00, conference room 12 at my office. I advise each of you to attend with counsel. If you fail to appear, we proceed another way." Daniel looked at me as if he still half believed he could call me back into the shape of mother before witness, widow before adversary. "Mom," he said, almost whispering now, "don't do this." I stood. "You already did." Then I picked up my keys, nodded once to Richard, and walked out with Joanna and Martin beside me. In the elevator down to the club lobby, Joanna glanced at me. "How are you holding?" "I'd like them out of my house by tonight." She gave one short nod. "Reasonable." Martin checked his watch. "You should know they thought they had the leverage." I looked at my reflection in the bronze elevator doors, at the line of my shoulders, the steadiness of my mouth. "I know," I said. "They had no idea they gave me a case file." The offices of Price, Adler, and Keene were on the 34th floor of a glass building that looked over the river and a long, clean stretch of downtown Chicago. The lobby on Monday afternoon smelled of cedar and expensive paper, bronze directory letters, creamstone floors, a reception desk so pale and minimal it made everyone who approached it feel slightly overexplained. It was exactly the kind of place people came when charm had failed and records were all that mattered. Conference room 12 sat at the end of a quiet corridor behind frosted glass. Inside, there was a walnut table that gleamed under recessed lighting, high-backed leather chairs, water in square glass bottles, and one long panel of windows casting the city in cool silver. The room had the atmosphere of authority that never needs to raise its voice. I arrived at 143 with Joanna, Martin, and a junior associate named Rebecca Lynn, who carried a stack of bound folders with color tabs. Rebecca couldn't have been older than 28, but she moved with that invaluable early career precision that says she never forgets a page number. At 158, Daniel came in first. He had changed ties, navy instead of blue. A detail so transparent it almost made me tired. Men always think fresh silk can do what character failed to do 3 hours earlier. He was alone for exactly 30 seconds. Then Lila entered with a lawyer from her father's golf circle, a flushed man named Stephen Marr who looked as though he'd been pulled from a lunch he preferred. Celeste and Gordon arrived with separate counsel, which told me all I needed to know about how much they already trusted one another. The last to enter was Daniel's attorney, a gray-haired litigator named Paul Neri, who took one look at the number of folders on our side of the table and visibly recalculated the afternoon. Their body language had changed from the club that morning. Daniel no longer occupied space. He folded inward, one forearm tucked close to his ribs, shoulders subtly rounded, knee bouncing once under the table before he forced it still. Lila, who usually arranged herself like a magazine cover, kept adjusting the cuff of her blazer, then her necklace, then the stem of her water glass. Celeste sat too upright, the posture of a woman trying not to look shaken and achieving only stiffness. Gordon leaned back at first, then forward, then back again, unable to locate the angle at which he could still feel in control. Joanna waited until everyone was seated. Then she spoke in the same tone she had used 20 years earlier when a developer twice her age tried to interrupt her and ended up apologizing for it. "We're here because my client, Evelyn Mercer, has substantial evidence that over a period of weeks, and culminating this past weekend, Several of you coordinated an attempt to manufacture a competency narrative in order to gain leverage over her personal assets, residence, and financial autonomy. This meeting is an opportunity to resolve that without immediate court filings or criminal referrals. Stephen Marr gave a thin smile. That's quite a dramatic framing. Rebecca slid a bound folder across to him. Tabs 1 through 9. His smile disappeared as soon as he saw the index. Joanna continued. We'll proceed in order. Martin stood and went to the screen at the far end of the room. Walnut wall. Built-in display. No fuss. He clicked a remote and the first slide appeared. Timeline summary. June 24th. Daniel Mercer requests trust structure information from Richard Connolly. July 3rd. Lila Mercer contacts North Shore Motors regarding duplicate key programming under the pretense of vehicle maintenance coordination. July 8th. Sofia Delgado instructed to compile a chronology titled Memory Incidents. Evelyn. July 10th. Helper and elder law consultation scheduled. July 12th. Unauthorized vehicle removal. Stonegate Residences tour. Elder law consultation attended. Third-party operation of vehicle resulting in damage. Fabricated text screenshot created later that evening. July 14th. Hawthorne Club confrontation with proposed asset restrictions. Dates, when aligned cleanly, can strip drama down to bone. Nobody in that room could hide inside tone anymore. Paul Neri cleared his throat. Daniel acknowledges requesting general information about his mother's estate planning. That is not improper. Joanna nodded once. In isolation, no. In sequence with the rest, yes. Martin clicked again. Up came the copied key invoice. Customer reference field. L. Mercer. Appointment requested by email from Lila's assistant. Payment method, ending in the last 4 digits of a Bennett family business card. Stephen Marr frowned. Could be routine. Martin clicked again. Email chain. Sofia Delgado confirming. Duplicate programmed and left at front desk. Will add to Monday file. Lila's lawyer slowly removed his glasses. Lila spoke for the first time since sitting down. That key was for valet convenience. Evelyn loses things. I didn't look at her. Joanna answered instead. Evelyn had both original keys in her possession until this matter surfaced. Your client obtained a third key without disclosure. Celeste whispered something to Gordon. He hissed back. Not now. The next slide showed route data. A clean map. Lake Forest to Wilmette, to Winnetka, to Chicago to Miramar and back. Timestamps at each stop. Martin did not dramatize. That was part of why he was good. He never asked evidence to do work beyond its own weight. Note stop at Stonegate Residences at 12:41 p.m., he said. We subpoenaed nothing. We didn't need to. Security staff voluntarily confirmed that Celeste and Gordon Bennett toured the guest house annex and were introduced by Ms. Mercer as family considering relocation near the Mercer property. They were shown pricing for bridge, support services, and private transport. Lila looked at her mother. Why would they say that? Celeste's lips trembled. Because that's what you told them. Lila snapped. I told them we were exploring options. For your parents, I said quietly, in my life. No one answered. Martin moved to the next slide. A still image from Halpern Elder Law's reception check-in sheet. Daniel's name. Lila's name. Intake note regarding cognitive concerns. Proposed questions about temporary authority over accounts and residence management. Daniel straightened. I didn't know they wrote it that way. Joanna turned to him. That's your defense. Paul Neri put a hand on Daniel's forearm. Don't answer anything substantive yet. That would be wise, Joanna said. Then Martin opened the audio file. I had considered asking him not to play it. There is humiliation in hearing betrayal aloud in a formal room. But some truths deserve a better floor than memory alone. The speaker built into the wall carried Lila's voice, so clearly that even she winced at its smooth certainty. Once Daniel gets her to step back from the accounts, the house is the next conversation. The guest house is empty. Then Celeste. Do not say that so loudly. Then Gordon's laugh. You could almost hear the oxygen change. Stephen Marr raised a hand. We object to the use and interpretation. You may object in writing, Joanna said. Today you may also listen. Martin stopped the clip and advanced to the next tab. This one belonged to Rebecca, who slid copies to every counsel at the table. Tab 6, Joanna said. Prepared by Sofia Delgado, sworn this morning. Lila went pale again. She swore what? Rebecca spoke for the first time, clear and calm. That on July 8th and July 11th, you instructed her to compile incidents portraying Ms. Mercer as forgetful, unstable, and vulnerable to mismanaging assets. She further swears you asked her to create a text mock-up to support the claim that permission for vehicle use had been granted. Stephen Marr flipped to the last page, found the notary's seal, and shut the folder. Lila turned to Daniel with disbelief, so naked it was almost childish. You said she wouldn't do anything. Daniel stared at the table. I didn't know about Sophia. That was not the line she needed from him, and both of them knew it. The fracture widened. Gordon leaned toward his lawyer. This is turning into scapegoating. Celeste snapped, more sharply than I'd heard her speak all day. Scapegoating. You were the one talking about the guest house, as if it was already furnished for us. He swung toward her. Because your daughter said it was practically decided. Lila's head turned between them. Don't do this. Do what? Celeste whispered fiercely. Tell the truth, now that your little plan collapsed. Daniel finally looked up at Lila. You told me the assistant file was just in case my mother reacted badly. Lila laughed once, stunned and bitter. Your mother? Right. Now she's your mother again. Joanna let them unravel for exactly 12 seconds, no more. Then she placed both hands on the table. Let's return to sequence, she said, because intent matters. The next part was the one I had asked for specifically, not because I needed them ruined, because I needed everyone in that room to understand that this had not been a careless family overstep. It had been designed. Martin projected a second timeline, more detailed. March 4th. Daniel asks whether Evelyn has updated house staff emergency contacts and who holds medical release forms. April 17th. Lila emails Sophia requesting list of elder care attorneys with strong discretion. May 9th. Daniel asks Richard general questions about trustee substitution and signature authority if Mom ever needs help. June 2nd. Celeste tours Mercer Guest House during family brunch, asks about bathroom grab bars and separate entrance. June 24th. Daniel requests trust structure summary. July 3rd. Duplicate key obtained. July 8th. Memory incidents file created. July 10th. Halpern consultation scheduled. July 12th. Unauthorized vehicle use and Stonegate tour. July 14th. Public confrontation with proposed voluntary restrictions. Months, not days. That mattered. Paul Neri rubbed a hand over his mouth. Even he looked irritated now. Daniel, you told me this began with the Saturday argument. Daniel's answer was barely audible. I thought it did. I believe that, actually. Not all of it, but enough to know he had participated in something whose machinery was partly built by someone more ambitious than he was. Daniel had always wanted easier outcomes than the world gives. That flaw makes people vulnerable to stronger appetites. Joanna turned one page in front of her. There is another matter. Evelyn, if you would. I had known the moment was coming. Still, when I spoke, I felt the old ache under my ribs where grief and anger sometimes touch. After Thomas died, I said, I left more in place than I should have. Family access, informal authority, people coming and going because I believed familiarity was its own safeguard. I was wrong. No one moved. I continued. 3 months ago, I noticed documents in my upstairs office slightly misaligned. Nothing missing. Just touched. I said nothing. 2 months ago, Daniel asked twice whether I still intended to leave the Lake Forest house in trust rather than transfer early. Last month, Lila asked if I had considered letting her parents stay in the guest house temporarily. Last week, Teresa told me my desk drawer had been left half an inch open after I'd locked it. I looked at Lila, so I changed what was inside. Stephen Marr looked up. What does that mean? It means, Joanna said, taking over, that certain summary sheets available in Evelyn's home office during the past 10 days were decoy documents prepared by our firm. They contained harmless but distinctive language regarding account timing and discretionary transfer options. That same language appears verbatim in Sofia Delgado's notes describing what Lila Mercer intended to present this morning as evidence of financial confusion. Daniel shut his eyes. Lila's lawyer went very still. I watched realization pass through her in stages. First disbelief, then calculation, then the sick recognition that she had not merely been caught, she had been guided. I had made sure the documents most likely to tempt them contained the exact phrasing that would identify them later. I let that understanding arrive without helping it. Finally, I said, I made sure you'd find exactly what I wanted you to find. Lila stared at me as though she had never seen me before. Maybe she hadn't. All the years she'd known me, I had been the easy one to underestimate. The widow who hosted, the mother who remembered birthdays, the woman who made room at the table and sent leftovers home in proper containers. People often mistake maintenance for softness. They do not understand how much attention it requires. Stephen Marr cleared his throat. Even accepting all of this, my client would characterize her actions as misguided concern rather than malicious intent. Families make poor decisions under emotional strain. Joanna nodded as if she appreciated the effort. And courts assess patterns, documents, unauthorized access, misrepresentation, and fabricated evidence. So let's discuss consequences. Rebecca distributed a final packet, settlement and cooperation terms, immediate surrender of any copied keys, garage access fobs, gate credentials, and digital codes. Written acknowledgement that no permission was given for vehicle use on July 12th. Payment for vehicle damage, investigative costs, and legal fees. Withdrawal of all informal or proposed claims regarding Evelyn Mercer's competency, residence, accounts, or medical decision-making. Agreement to vacate and remain off Mercer residential property absent written invitation. Written correction to Richard Connolly and any third parties who were led to believe Evelyn was in cognitive decline. Non-disparagement, conditional forbearance by Evelyn Mercer from filing immediate civil claims and from referring the full matter for criminal investigation, contingent upon strict compliance. Gordon slammed his palm on the table. This is extortion. No, Joanna said. It's your last quiet off-ramp. Celeste took the packet with trembling hands and began reading from the last page forward, as if hoping the order would change the result. Daniel looked physically ill. Lila had gone beyond pale now into that strange, bloodless stillness people get when pride is the only thing holding them upright. What if we don't sign? She asked. Joanna answered without a pause. Then by 5 o'clock today we file for injunctive relief, preserve digital evidence, notify insurers regarding unauthorized vehicle operation, and make referrals on attempted elder exploitation, fraud, and document fabrication. Discovery follows. Your assistant's sworn statement becomes part of the record. So does the audio. So does the false screenshot. So does the timeline. Lila swallowed. Paul Neri turned to Daniel. Did you know about the fake screenshot? Daniel said nothing. Daniel, Paul said more firmly. No, he muttered. I knew she was putting together a file. I didn't know about the screenshot. Lila whipped toward him. That is unbelievable. He finally looked back at her, and for the first time all day there was anger in him that wasn't borrowed from someone else. Unbelievable. You told me this was to keep things orderly. You said if Mom got emotional, we needed examples. You told me it wasn't going anywhere unless she forced it. And you were happy enough to sit at brunch and let me do the talking. Because you said you knew how to handle it. Gordon snorted. Well, she certainly handled it. Celeste turned on him. You encouraged every minute of this because you wanted that guest house. He glared. And you wanted the address. At least I didn't pretend it was for Evelyn's own good. Stephen Marr exhaled hard and pinched the bridge of his nose. Please stop helping. I sat very still while they tore at one another. There is no advantage in interrupting people while they abandon their own coalition. A few minutes later, there was a soft knock at the door. Rebecca stepped out, returned, and leaned down to Joanna's ear. Joanna nodded. One more item, she said. Lila made a frustrated sound. Of course there is. The door opened again, and in walked Sofia Delgado. She wore a charcoal sheath dress, low black heels, and an expression of concentrated calm. Mid-30s, sharp dark eyes, hair twisted cleanly at the nape. I had seen her once before from a distance at a holiday fundraiser, moving behind Lila with a clipboard while Lila accepted compliments meant partly for other people's labor. Lila's chair scraped back. What is she doing here? Sophia did not look at her. She addressed Joanna. You said there might be factual questions. There may be, Joanna said. Please have a seat. Sophia took the chair nearest the end of the table, folded her hands, and finally turned toward the room. I'm here, she said, Because last Thursday Ms. Mercer asked me to compile a file that would support the claim that Evelyn Mercer was losing capacity. She dictated some incidents. She embellished others. On Sunday evening, she asked me to create a screenshot showing permission for the car. I refused. She used materials I had assembled earlier and did it herself. Stephen Marr tried to interrupt. Ms. Delgado, you should be aware. Sophia spoke over him with perfect politeness. I'm also aware that on April 17th she asked me to collect elder law recommendations specifically for cases where adult children need leverage before the parent gets stubborn. I have that email. I forwarded it this morning. No one breathed. She went on. For the record, I stayed long enough to document everything because my grandmother spent 8 months under the informal control of a nephew who kept describing it as help. He sold her jewelry one piece at a time. So when Ms. Mercer started using words like simplify, protect, voluntary, and transition, I recognized the script. I looked at her then. Really looked. Not as someone's assistant. As a woman who had made an expensive choice in favor of her own conscience. Lila found her voice again, but it came out ragged. You worked for me. I trusted you. Sophia met her eyes at last. No. You paid me. Often late. Even Joanna's mouth moved, just slightly. Sophia reached into her bag and set a small flash drive on the table. That contains exported emails, calendar invites, the draft memory chronology, and a voice memo from Friday in which Ms. Mercer asked whether the Monday brunch room could be made private enough to avoid a scene but public enough to keep Evelyn controlled. Lila made a strangled sound and turned away. There are moments when an entire room reorders itself around a new truth. This was one. Sophia had entered as staff and sat down as witness. The hierarchy shifted in plain view. Joanna thanked her and had Rebecca collect the drive. Then she delivered the ultimatum again, slower this time, with every consequence named in full. Civil exposure, financial exposure, reputational exposure, potential criminal implications if the matter escalated. She spoke like a person laying instruments on stainless steel, one after another, until there was nothing left to misunderstand. Cooperate, she said, or lose the right to control how this becomes known. Gordon's lawyer asked for a caucus. Daniel's lawyer asked for one too. Within minutes the room divided into whispered corners. Leather chairs moved. Water poured. Pens clicked. City lights slid across the table in a long white band. I remained seated at the center on our side, hands folded, watching my son from 10 feet away while he received explanations no parent ever imagines arranging for their own child. He looked older by the minute. Not wiser. Just older. Lila whispered furiously to Stephen Marr, then to her mother, then to Daniel. Daniel answered once. Lila recoiled as if struck. Gordon spoke too loudly. Celeste cried soundlessly, dabbing beneath her eyes with the edge of a tissue. Sophia sat outside the combat entirely, straight-backed, composed, as if she had stepped free of weather and intended to stay there. After 27 minutes, the lawyers reconvened. Paul Neri spoke first. My client will sign, with language clarifying that no admission of criminal liability is made. Stephen Marr added, Lila will sign under the same reservation. Gordon's counsel sighed. Mr. Bennett also. Celeste's lawyer nodded last. And Mrs. Bennett. Joanna didn't smile. She simply slid signature pages into place one by one. There is a peculiar sound expensive pens make on thick paper. Softer than ballpoint. More decisive. Daniel signed first, hand visibly unsteady at the end of his surname. Lila signed second, pressing so hard I could see the impression through 2 sheets beneath. Gordon muttered while he signed. Celeste paused halfway through her first name, then finished. Rebecca collected each page, checked every line, placed notary tabs, and rotated the packet for the next person. Efficient. Impersonal. Exactly as it should have been. When Daniel was done, he looked at me. Mom, he said quietly, I never wanted it to go this far. I believe that too, in a limited, pitiful way. He hadn't wanted consequence. That is not the same as innocence. You wanted convenience, I said. It went exactly that far. Lila's eyes flashed. You are loving this. I turned to her. No, I'm finishing it. That shut her mouth. The notary entered. Seal stamped. Copies distributed. Key surrender confirmed. Gate credentials revoked in writing. Teresa had already changed the property codes. North Shore Motors, would reprogram the vehicle system by morning. Richard Connolly would receive a correction letter by end of day. Daniel's temporary access to nothing had, fortunately, remained exactly that, nothing. He had reached for authority before obtaining it. The audacity would have been impressive if it weren't so common. When the final page was complete, chairs shifted again. Briefcases closed. Everyone wanted movement now, the way people do after an unpleasant truth has been made official, and they are desperate to re-enter ordinary time. I stood before they could flee into that illusion. Daniel rose too, almost automatically. So did Lila. Gordon looked away. Celeste couldn't meet my eyes. I picked up my copy of the executed agreement and slid it into my bag. Then I said the one sentence I had saved for the very end. Next time, I said evenly, looking at Lila and then at Daniel, make sure they're not working for both sides. Sophia lowered her gaze, but I saw the edge of a smile. I moved toward the door. Lila called after me, voice thin with some final need to injure. You really are going to destroy this family over a car? I turned with my hand on the brushed steel handle. No, I said, over the fact that you didn't ask. Then I left them there in the leather chairs and cooled air and authority they had tried to borrow for themselves. The next few days were administrative, which is to say they were honest. Locks changed. Codes changed. File access reviewed. Teresa and I spent Tuesday morning in the upstairs office with a shred bin, a label maker, and a legal pad. Afternoon light hit the brass drawer pulls and the pale wool runner in the hallway while I separated old habit from actual necessity. Family papers no longer lived under family assumptions. Originals went to Joanna's vault. Copies were indexed. Medical forms were updated. Trustee language tightened. Beneficiary communication protocols changed. I had never considered any of this dramatic before. After Monday, it felt almost luxurious. Daniel called 14 times in the first week. The voicemails moved through predictable stages. At first he was indignant. Mom, this has gotten way out of hand. Then injured. You humiliated me in front of everyone. Then nostalgic. I keep thinking about Sunday dinners after Dad was alive and how this didn't have to happen. Then desperate. Please just tell me what to do. I archived all of them in a folder Joanna had suggested I name something neutral. I called it July. Lila texted instead. Long paragraphs at 1:12 a.m. and 2:03 a.m., the hours when entitled people are most offended by the arrival of consequence. Some messages were pure anger. You made me look criminal over a family discussion. Others tried seduction through guilt. Daniel is falling apart, and you know exactly what you're doing. A few were almost laughably sentimental. I used to admire your strength. I wish you'd shown us grace. Grace, apparently, was what she called access without boundaries. I archived hers too. Celeste mailed a note on heavy cream stationery with embossed edges. I miss what we were. The family isn't the same. She underlined isn't. I remember that because the ink had pooled slightly at the end of the stroke. Her hand must have trembled. Gordon sent one email threatening defamation action if certain false impressions reached his business associates. Joanna answered on my behalf within 19 minutes and attached 3 exhibits. There were no more threats after that. By August, the social consequences had begun to distribute themselves with a kind of elegant proportionality. Lila's first loss was cosmetic. Hawthorne's women stopped inviting her to committee lunches. That might sound small to anyone outside those circles, but exclusion is a language there, and they speak it fluently. Then 2 clients at her boutique public relations firm withdrew upcoming contracts, not because some public scandal exploded, but because reliable people quietly stopped calling her reliable. Reputation rarely collapses all at once. It loosens stitch by stitch. Sophia left the firm the same week and filed claims for unpaid overtime and retaliatory conduct. Lila, who had always treated staff as movable decor, suddenly discovered that paper trails have a way of surviving the moods of those who create them. Daniel's consequence was less visible but more permanent. He had been under review for an equity track at his architecture firm, Hollis Dane Studio. Not guaranteed, but close enough that he'd started speaking as if it were done. Then Joanna's preservation letters reached the right people, because some of the communication relevant to the Monday ambush had moved through his firm email and administrative support. Nothing illegal on their end. Just a firm awakening to the fact that one of its senior associates had used office systems while arranging a private campaign against his own mother. They did not fire him. That would have been cleaner. Instead, they removed him from partnership consideration for the year, reassigned a major museum renovation bid, and suggested a leave of absence. Daniel hated consequence most when it arrived politely. Celeste's punishment belonged to her preferred theater, the social one. She had spent years cultivating a posture of refined judgment through charity boards, museum donor dinners, and those brittle little brunches where women pretend to discuss fundraising and are actually ranking one another's stability. By September, invitations thinned. Not vanished. Thinned. Enough to be noticed. A board vice chair position she expected to rotate into when elsewhere. A luncheon host claimed capacity limitations. 2 women who used to greet her with both hands now managed with fingertips and weather. Gordon suffered the kind of humiliation that men like him consider unendurable because it comes without an obvious enemy. He had been bragging for months about transition plans and family property conversations at his club. After Monday, those same men understood, in outline if not in full detail, that he'd strutted ahead of a deal that never belonged to him. I heard he tried to laugh it off as family overreaction. No one laughed with him. In October, Nora Whitfield brought me the first truly satisfying update. Nora had been my closest friend since our sons were in middle school and still smelled faintly of grass and damp sweat after soccer practice. She lived in Glencoe, wore linen as if it were armor, and had the unique gift of delivering gossip like a weather report. Precise, unsentimental, impossible to argue with. We were sitting in my sunroom that morning. New cushions on the rattan chairs, pale striped rug underfoot, a tray between us with coffee, pear slices, and toasted walnut bread Teresa had started making after deciding, correctly, that I was eating like a person in litigation and needed intervention. The light was clean and generous, the kind of morning that makes even silence feel repaired. Nora set down her cup and said, "You won't believe who I just saw at the Four Seasons bar at 11:30 on a Tuesday." I raised an eyebrow.